Trump warned Zelensky that Putin wanted more of Ukraine, but no one expected the hidden consequences that would unfold behind closed doors. In the quiet corridors of power, secrets moved faster than anyone outside could imagine. In early 2021, an extraordinary event unfolded, hidden from public view, involving leaders whose decisions carried the weight of millions. What began as a routine diplomatic call soon revealed itself to be far more than ordinary. Behind closed doors, a message was delivered that would echo through the halls of international politics. It was a warning, subtle yet alarming, suggesting that a powerful leader had ambitions far beyond what anyone had publicly acknowledged. At first, those involved treated it as a private concern, assuming that discretion would protect both nations from unnecessary panic. Yet beneath the surface, the implications were far-reaching. Investigators later discovered unusual phone records and encrypted communications surrounding the call. They noted patterns that seemed ordinary on the surface but hinted at something larger, something intentionally hidden. Analysts struggled to reconcile what was spoken with what was documented. Every detail mattered: the time, the phrasing, even pauses in the conversation. Small clues suggested an urgency that was never fully acknowledged publicly. In the weeks that followed, intelligence agencies quietly began tracing threads that connected the conversation to broader geopolitical strategies. Each new piece of evidence seemed to raise more questions than it answered. Even before leaks became public, insiders sensed that the situation was fragile. Security briefings hinted at movements and maneuvers that, if misinterpreted, could destabilize entire regions. Advisors debated whether to act immediately or to wait, fearing that premature action might trigger unintended consequences. Meanwhile, analysts outside the inner circle began piecing together discrepancies in official statements and reports. They noticed subtle changes in tone and wording, hinting at internal conflict or hidden pressures. These clues suggested that the call, while brief, had the potential to influence the course of international relations. As the story slowly unfolded behind closed doors, the world remained unaware of the invisible tension building between nations. Every day, decisions were being made in silence, shaping events that would later seem sudden and inexplicable. What seemed like a single conversation was, in reality, the starting point of a complex web of political maneuvering, clandestine warnings, and strategic calculations. In the shadow of these events, only a few understood the gravity of what had been said and the potential consequences that could follow if the warnings were ignored. The stage was set, and the first moves in a dangerous game were already being made, with the world none the wiser. Months after the initial conversation, the story began to surface in unexpected ways. Documents, never meant to leave secure vaults, somehow found their way into the hands of a small group of investigative journalists. These files revealed layers of information that had been carefully concealed. Analysts pored over the leaked material, trying to separate fact from speculation. The documents suggested that the warning given during the call had been serious, but responses from those in power were inconsistent, delayed, or even ignored. In offices around the world, intelligence officers pieced together a pattern that painted a troubling picture. Strategic territories were at risk, and covert campaigns were quietly reshaping alliances. Financial records, travel logs, and diplomatic correspondence hinted at a network of influence that had remained hidden from the public. Individuals connected to the call were suddenly linked to transactions and meetings that raised questions about motives and loyalties. The more experts examined the evidence, the clearer it became that this was no ordinary diplomatic exchange. What had been considered routine or procedural now appeared to be part of a calculated strategy, one that could alter the balance of power in ways few had anticipated. Every uncovered document revealed more connections, more hints of manipulation, and more evidence that someone had gone to great lengths to hide the truth. At the same time, intelligence agencies began noticing subtle signals in global communications. Unusual activity patterns suggested that certain actors were monitoring the situation closely, reacting to moves no one outside the inner circle could see. Analysts identified recurring anomalies in encrypted messaging networks and financial transactions, indicating that the flow of information had been carefully controlled. Those who had initially dismissed the call as minor suddenly realized it could have far-reaching consequences. The stakes escalated further when independent experts traced a series of confidential warnings embedded in internal reports. These warnings had been buried deep within bureaucratic channels, Overlooked by many but discovered by a few determined researchers. The hidden urgency became undeniable. Potential risks to national security were real, imminent, and potentially catastrophic. The deeper the investigation went, the more it became evident that the warning during the conversation had been prophetic. What began as a single, private exchange had transformed into a sprawling investigation, exposing networks of secrecy, influence, and deception. Every new discovery suggested that the events unfolding were not random, but orchestrated, with outcomes shaped by invisible hands pulling strings behind the scenes. The investigation took an unexpected turn when evidence began to emerge from places no one had considered. Surveillance data from neighboring countries showed movements that, at first glance, appeared routine, but analysts quickly realized they were anything but. Troop deployments and logistical adjustments coincided almost perfectly with the timing of the secretive call. What had seemed like ordinary exercises now looked like rehearsals for something much larger and more deliberate. The realization sent shockwaves through intelligence circles. The warning given in that call was not merely theoretical, it was being acted upon in real time. As scrutiny deepened, whistleblowers from within government offices came forward with alarming claims. They revealed that critical warnings about potential invasions and destabilizing actions had been deliberately buried in official reports. Those meant to act on the information had either ignored it or slowed its dissemination, creating a dangerous lag between knowledge and response. Analysts pieced together a timeline of missed opportunities, understanding that small delays could have monumental consequences. Each revelation painted a picture of a carefully controlled environment where information was weaponized and withheld to serve hidden agendas. Further complicating matters, independent researchers noticed a strange pattern. Private intermediaries were moving between capitals, carrying messages that never appeared in official records. These shadow channels suggested that powerful actors were influencing outcomes without leaving a paper trail. Financial networks, corporate transactions, and diplomatic meetings that seemed unrelated at first were all linked to the same web of influence. Experts realized that the conversation, while brief and secretive, had triggered a cascade of actions across multiple continents. The tension escalated when analysts identified a subtle, yet unmistakable, signal of coordination between military and political actors. Each maneuver, each choice of words in diplomatic cables, seemed to align with the warnings embedded in the original conversation. What had started as a single private warning had grown into a complex game of strategy, manipulation, and risk. Every step taken in the shadows had consequences for millions of people, and the world remained largely unaware of the storm building behind the scenes. By the end of this phase, it was clear that the situation had reached a critical point. The initial conversation, once dismissed as routine, had set off a chain reaction of intelligence gathering, hidden maneuvers, and covert operations. Decisions made or delayed were now shaping outcomes on a scale far beyond what anyone could have predicted. In the shadows of power, the game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. As the investigation deepened, it became increasingly clear that the situation was far more complex than anyone had imagined. Evidence suggested that private intermediaries were being used to manipulate the flow of information, operating in ways that left no official record. Analysts discovered patterns in emails, financial transfers, and travel documents that hinted at coordinated efforts to shape events behind the scenes. Every revelation added a new layer to an already tangled web of influence, showing that the initial conversation had set off ripples reaching far beyond what anyone had predicted. Intelligence officers noticed unusual behaviors in multiple governments, signaling that hidden actors were quietly guiding decisions. Diplomatic channels that appeared normal were in fact carefully choreographed, with information selectively released to create pressure or confusion. Analysts realized that some warnings were intentionally delayed or altered, masking the urgency of the situation. The original message from the private call had become the central piece of a much larger puzzle, one that involved economic leverage, strategic positioning, and secret alliances. Meanwhile, journalists following the leaks faced growing obstacles. Attempts to trace sources were met with misinformation, and digital trails often ended abruptly, leaving investigators frustrated. Yet each breakthrough revealed something remarkable. The conversation had been a trigger, and the subsequent concealment of critical intelligence showed how easily events could be manipulated when transparency was absent. Even minor actors played a role, with subtle actions creating cascading effects that reshaped global strategies. The tension grew as analysts uncovered financial transactions that seemed unrelated but were in fact linked to key players in multiple nations. Travel logs, meeting records, and even minor bureaucratic changes suggested a network of influence moving quietly through official and unofficial channels. Experts began to understand that the warning from the call had been just one piece of a carefully orchestrated effort, with consequences unfolding in real time. By the end of this stage, it was evident that what had seemed like a single private exchange had triggered a series of covert operations, hidden agendas, and calculated manipulations. The world remained largely unaware of the forces at play. But behind the scenes, a high-stakes game was unfolding, with decisions, delays, and secret communications determining the course of events. The initial warning had proven prophetic, setting in motion a chain of actions whose full impact was only beginning to be understood. The stakes were higher than anyone had imagined, and the consequences would soon be felt on a scale few could predict. The final phase of the investigation revealed the full magnitude of what had begun as a single private conversation. Intelligence agencies confirmed that the warnings had been accurate and urgent, and every delayed response had compounded the risks. What seemed like a minor exchange had directly influenced decisions at the highest levels of power, shaping global strategies in ways no one had anticipated. Analysts traced back through months of encrypted communications, financial records, and surveillance reports, uncovering a web of actions that linked governments, corporations, and private intermediaries in a network of covert influence. The scope of the operation was staggering. Evidence showed that actors on multiple continents had coordinated efforts to manipulate outcomes, sometimes using financial incentives, sometimes leveraging political pressures. Each maneuver was calculated, often invisible to the public eye, yet it carried consequences that affected millions. In some cases, decisions taken quietly in government offices altered the balance of power in regions that were already unstable. The initial conversation had set off a chain reaction, and every action or inaction added to the tension and uncertainty. Whistleblowers and journalists continued to reveal pieces of the puzzle, showing how information had been selectively shared and concealed. Leaks highlighted hidden agendas, covert alliances, and deliberate obfuscation of facts. Analysts realized that even small choices such as delaying a report or withholding a warning could have enormous ramifications. The deeper they dug, the more it became clear that the world had been operating under a fragile illusion of control, while powerful forces quietly directed outcomes from behind the scenes. In the aftermath, nations scrambled to rebuild trust and reevaluate policies. Historians began documenting a story that spanned continents, exposing networks of secrecy, manipulation, and influence that no single report could fully explain. The conversation, once private and seemingly inconsequential, had become a turning point, a reminder that a single warning, if ignored or mishandled, could ignite consequences far beyond expectation. Ultimately, the story concluded not with closure, but with a series of questions about accountability, loyalty, and the fragile balance of power in the modern world. Decisions made in shadows had shaped events in the light of day, leaving nations, leaders, and citizens to grapple with the aftereffects. The lesson was clear: in the realm of international politics, even a single conversation can set in motion a chain of events whose impact is felt long after the words are spoken, and whose consequences may never be fully known. The world had glimpsed only the surface of a far deeper, far more dangerous game.